Hello, I'm Matt from Practical BI and welcome to another Power BI guide. This time we're looking at how to visualize events that are open within a particular date range. So this is slightly different to representing when events started or ended. We're specifically looking at how do we visualize across multiple dates when an event was open. So that event could be, let's say, an absence episode, as we'll look at in our example in a minute. But it could be the employment time of an employee. It could be the length of time that a service request was open. And how do we visualize that in our report? So let's just have a look in a bit more detail at what the problem is here with an example. So let's say that we have an event that opens on the 29th of May and closes on the 2nd of June. And our reporting requirement is to show the months that event was open within. So it may not have been open for the whole month. We just want to show the months that the event was open in. So much like our results table here, we'd want to see a 1 in May and a 1 in June to represent that this event was open in May and it was open in June, even though it wasn't open for the whole of those months. And the issue is that our data, as we can see on the right here, we probably have an open date and a closed date in our date range. So the issue is how do we display that within our visualizations in Power BI? So let's jump over to our report and take a look. Okay, so let's start by having a look at the data set that I've got here. I'm just going to go into my data tab here and have a look at my absence data set. So we're not going to use all of this data, but if you just consider it to be absence data, so maybe unplanned absence, we've got absence types here, things like sickness, medical appointments, injuries, etc. Crucially, we've got an absence ID for each absence, and we've got an end and a start date for each absence. So this is our period that we'll want to look to use to determine whether or not our absence was open within a particular date range or date period. And then I'll just take you over to the data model briefly as well. So simple data model here. I've got my absence table and I've got a calendar table. If you want more information on how to create a date table and how and why they can help, then check out one of my other videos on that. I'll put a link in the description to this one. But I've got two relationships here. I've got a relationship between my absence end date and my date table, and one between my absence start date and my date table, and both are in active relationships. Okay, so I'm just going to dive back into the front end of the report. So we're talking about open within a period. So let's just lay out what the problem is here. So if you just have a look at the line chart, that I've got at the bottom, I've got my absences opened and closed over time. So my new absences and my closed absences. So my new absences are based on my absence start date. In this view of the graph, I'm looking at month. So is the absence opened in the month? Do I have an absence start date in the month? And do I have an absence end date in the month for my closed absences? So that's fairly straightforward to do. I'll just show you the measures as they look for those. Let's expand this out. So for my new absence episodes, I'm simply taking a count of I'm using my existing measure just to count absence episodes, but I'm activating my relationship there between the date table and the start date, which is what gives me my number opened over time. And similarly for my closed absences, I'm just doing exactly the same thing, but this time I'm activating that relationship between the date table and my absence end date. So that's fine, but the problem is we want to be able to show the absences that were open in the month. So for example, what happens if we have an absence that opens in February and doesn't close until May? We want to represent that and give a true picture of the number of absences that are open over the course of the year. And there are different ways of doing this, as there often are in Power BI. But let's just see what would happen if we just dragged absence episodes, or count of absence episodes. So that's just a distinct count here of absence ID. What would happen if we dragged that onto the canvas here? And as you can see, there's no relationship defined there. We've just got the total, which is 8,336 episodes, showing across the whole year, which doesn't help us at all. So let's have a look at a solution to this. So I'm going to go over to my absence page here. So this is what we're after really. I've got a third series on my what is now a combo chart here. I've got bars that show the number of open episodes in each month, and I've still got my lines that are showing my new and closed episodes in each month. I've got KPIs at the top showing those open in the period, new in the period, and closed in the period. At the moment they're showing the same. All of my absences fall within the date range I've got selected. Let's just have a look and see what happens as I change that date range. So I'll just choose a new date range. You can see that if I'm looking between the 18th of March and the 6th of June, I've got 1,961 episodes that were open at some point, at any point during that period, versus 1,800 new and 1,800 similar number closed as well. Okay, so how do we show this, and what's the best approach in terms of the measure that we use? So I've created here a new measure. I've called it Open Absence Episodes, and let's just expand that and have a look, and then we'll look at creating something similar just to work through. So I've used the approach of declaring variables in DAX. This is something that I'll do another video on in more detail, but for now I've just declared two variables, a max date and a min date, and then I'm using them in my calculation further on. So my max date just gives me my max of my calendar date field, and my min date gives me the min of my calendar date field. And so the reason that I can do that is if I get back to my bar chart, let's say I'm looking at March. So for the whole of March, let's just to be accurate, I'll start this from the 1st of March. So for the whole of March, against the March bar here, the minimum date is the 1st of March and the maximum date is the 31st of March. So let's have a look again at this measure. So my max date will be the 31st of March, my min date is the 1st of March. And what I'm saying is, after establishing the values for those variables, return the number of absence episodes, but filter my data for where my start date of my absence episode is on or before my maximum date, and my end date for my absence episode is on or after my minimum date. So the logic might take a little while to get your head around here, but what we're basically saying is if an absence starts on or before the end of the month, for example, then we can say that it was open in that month, and as long that is as the absence ends on or after the start of the month. So you can see that if let's say for example I have an absence that opens on the 10th of June and closes on the 10th of July, then for the month of June that will still meet the criteria of having a start date on or before the end of June and an end date on or after the start of June. So once I've created this measure, I've just brought it into my bar chart here, and we can see it working. But let's just to show you in a bit more detail how this is working, and to kind of prove that this is working, let's have a look at an absence here. I've got absence ID 1007 here. So this is one that we'd want to appear in 2 months in our current approach, that we couldn't do previously when we were looking at the problem earlier. So if we were just looking at start date or just end date, this absence would only appear against 1 month, as opposed to showing us that it appears across both. So let's select that 1007. As you can see, I've got my count for that absence in May and my count in June. I can see that it was a new absence against May and a closed absence against June. So that's working well. And just to show you that in more detail, if I drill down, I've got a day-by-day approach. So you can see that I can see for every day that this absence was open, and again I can see the day that it was opened and the day that it was closed. And so that day-by-day approach gives you a more detailed view of the absences each day, and it's another benefit of creating the measure in this way, is that I can apply any kind of hierarchy to my dates here and work through a drill down, and the measure is still valid and still works throughout that date range. So one final point is, let's say, for example, I'm starting off with the bar chart like this, and I want to show all absences in my table that were open in March, say. So if I select March here, what we want to happen is for our table here to filter just to show open absences, but as you can see, I've got some absences that weren't open in March. For example, the top one here opened in July and closed in July, so shouldn't show as open in March. So there are different ways of, again, and as always, there are different ways of doing this, but one simple approach is just for me to add a measure, the measure that I created around open absences, to my filters on this visual. So let's just drag that across. And I can just say is greater than and 0, for example. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me only absences that were open within March. Now I'll just lock that, hide my filter, and as you can see, I've now just got, when I click on March, I've got only absences that were open in March, even if, as you can see with this absence here, even if it was opened before March, it's still showing as open in March because it was open for 3 days in March in that case. And I can do the same thing just by clicking on April, and you'll see as the table updates, I've got my absences just for April there as well. Okay, so I hope that this video has been useful for you. If it has, please do like and subscribe. As always, if you have any feedback, comments or questions, please do add them to the comments underneath this video, and I look forward to speaking to you again.